History pivots on singular moments. One choice, one decision, and the trajectory of nations shifts forever. Today, we are examining 5 decisions that seemed logical at the time, but triggered catastrophic consequences that echo across centuries. These aren't minor tactical errors. These are choices that destroyed empires, ended dynasties, and reshaped the world map. This is New Facto, and these are the worst 5 decisions that changed history. Number 5. Napoleon invades Russia, 1812. By 1812, Napoleon Bonaparte controlled most of Europe. The French Empire stretched from Spain to Poland. His armies were considered invincible. Only Britain and Russia remained outside his grasp. When Tsar Alexander refused to enforce Napoleon's economic blockade against Britain, Napoleon made a decision that would end his reign. He would invade Russia. On June 24, 1812, Napoleon crossed the Niemen River with the largest army Europe had ever seen. 600,000 soldiers, multiple nationalities. The plan was simple: march to Moscow, force a decisive battle, and compel the Russians to surrender. The Russians refused to fight. Instead, they retreated deeper into their own territory, burning crops and towns as they went. Napoleon's supply lines stretched thinner with every mile. His army began starving. Disease spread through the ranks. By the time Napoleon reached Moscow in September, the city was abandoned and burning. Napoleon waited in Moscow for 5 weeks, expecting the Tsar to negotiate. No message came. With winter approaching and no supplies, Napoleon ordered the retreat. It became a death march. Freezing temperatures, starvation, and constant Russian attacks decimated his forces. Of the 600,000 men who entered Russia, fewer than 100,000 returned. This single decision shattered the myth of Napoleon's invincibility. Within 2 years, he would be defeated and exiled. The decision to invade Russia didn't just cost Napoleon an army, it cost him an empire.
Number 4. The British decide to tax tea, 1773. In 1773, Britain controlled 13 prosperous colonies along the Atlantic coast of North America. These colonies were wealthy, productive, and largely loyal to the crown. Britain needed revenue to pay debts from the 7 Years' War. The solution seemed obvious: tax the colonies. The Tea Act of 1773 wasn't even a new tax. It actually lowered the price of tea by allowing the British East India Company to sell directly to the colonies. But it preserved the principle that Britain could tax the colonies without their consent. British officials saw this as a minor administrative measure. The colonists saw it as tyranny. On December 16, 1773, colonists in Boston boarded 3 ships and dumped 342 chests of tea into the harbor. Britain's response was swift and harsh. They closed Boston Harbor, revoked Massachusetts' charter, and sent troops to enforce order. These coercive acts, as they were called, united the colonies in opposition. What followed was a war that Britain should have won easily. Instead, it became a grinding conflict that drained resources and national will. By 1783, Britain had lost its American colonies. The decision to tax tea, to assert a symbolic principle over practical governance, cost Britain the richest part of its empire and created a rival power that would eventually surpass it. The irony is stark. Britain spent more fighting the war than it would have collected in taxes over a century. The decision to tax tea didn't raise revenue, it lost a continent.
In 1793, China was the wealthiest, most populous nation on Earth. The Qing dynasty ruled over 1/3 of humanity. Emperor Qianlong considered China the center of civilization and all other nations as barbarians bearing tribute. When the British sent Lord Macartney to negotiate trade relations, the emperor's response would seal China's fate for the next century. The British wanted to open Chinese markets, establish diplomatic relations, and trade on equal terms. They brought gifts: telescopes, clocks, and mechanical devices showcasing European technological advances. Emperor Qianlong was unimpressed. In his response letter, he wrote that China possessed all things in abundance and had no need for foreign goods. He rejected every British request. This decision had catastrophic consequences. While China remained isolated and stagnant, Britain and other European powers industrialized rapidly. By the 1830s, British steam-powered warships and rifled cannons vastly outclassed Chinese military technology. When conflicts erupted over British opium smuggling, China discovered it could not defend itself. The Opium Wars of the 1840s and 1850s were humiliating defeats. China was forced to cede Hong Kong, open treaty ports, pay massive indemnities, and grant extraterritorial rights to foreigners. The Qing dynasty's prestige collapsed. Internal rebellions erupted, killing tens of millions. By 1912, the dynasty fell, ending over 2,000 years of imperial rule. Qianlong's decision in 1793 wasn't just diplomatic arrogance. It locked China into a path of isolation that made it vulnerable to foreign domination. One decision by one emperor consigned the world's richest nation to a century of humiliation and collapse. Number 2. Tsar Nicholas enters World War I, 1914.
By 1914, the Russian Empire was a powder keg. Industrial workers were striking, peasants were restless. The 1905 revolution had nearly toppled the monarchy. Tsar Nicholas II ruled over the largest empire on earth, but his authority was fragile. When Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia in July 1914, Nicholas faced a choice: mobilize in defense of fellow Slavs or stay neutral. Nicholas chose war. On July 30th, 1914, he ordered full mobilization of the Russian army. This triggered Germany's declaration of war, which pulled in France and Britain. Within weeks, Europe was engulfed in the largest war in history. Russian leadership expected a short, victorious conflict. Instead, they got disaster. Russian troops were poorly equipped, poorly led, and sent into battle without adequate supplies. At Tannenberg in August 1914, 2 entire Russian armies were destroyed. Over the next 3 years, Russia suffered over 9 million casualties. Cities faced bread shortages, soldiers deserted by the thousands. The home front collapsed. By March 1917, riots erupted in Petrograd. The army refused to fire on protesters. Nicholas abdicated, ending 3 centuries of Romanov rule. 8 months later, the Bolsheviks seized power in a communist revolution. Nicholas and his entire family were executed in 1918. The decision to enter World War I didn't just cost Nicholas his throne. It ended the Russian Empire, enabled the Bolshevik Revolution, and created the Soviet Union. The geopolitical consequences of this single decision shaped the entire 20th century. The Cold War, the space race, the division of Europe, all trace back to Nicholas's choice in July 1914. In 378 AD, the Roman Empire had endured for over 1,000 years. It had survived civil wars, barbarian invasions, and economic crises. Rome seemed eternal. Then, on August 9, 378, Emperor Valens made a decision that shattered that illusion forever. Gothic refugees fleeing the Huns had crossed into Roman territory. Mistreated and starving, they rebelled. Valens marched east with his army to crush them. His co-emperor, Gratian, was marching from the west with reinforcements. Military advisors urged Valens to wait. Combined, their forces would overwhelm the Goths. Valens refused to wait. Perhaps he feared Gratian would claim credit for the victory. Perhaps he underestimated the Gothic threat. On August 9th, near Adrianople, Valens ordered an immediate attack on the Gothic camp. His army was tired from marching in summer heat. Intelligence about Gothic numbers was incomplete. It was midday when the battle began. What happened next was catastrophe. Gothic cavalry, away foraging, returned and smashed into the Roman flanks. The Roman infantry found themselves encircled. Packed too tightly to maneuver, they were slaughtered where they stood. By nightfall, 2/3 of the Roman army was dead. Emperor Valens himself perished in the battle. His body was never found. Adrianople didn't end the Roman Empire immediately, but it began the end. For the first time, barbarians had annihilated a Roman field army and killed an emperor in open battle. The myth of Roman invincibility died at Adrianople. Within 30 years, Goths would sack Rome itself. Within a century, the Western Roman Empire would cease to exist. One decision, made in anger and pride, destroyed an army and set in motion the fall of the greatest empire the world had known. That is the ultimate cost of catastrophic decision-making.